Hi, everyone. So welcome to our first lecture, our first module. We are going to talk about body composition. And so really this lecture is going to talk about body composition and why we care. And then what are some common ways that we assess body composition, particularly in the clinic and maybe even as an exercise physiologist. So again, we are not body shaming or judging anyone for their body composition, where they store fat, where they don't store fat, if they're obese or not. But as clinicians, it's important for us to understand body composition so that we can help our clients, so that we can help our patients really be sort of the best version of themselves and as healthy as they can be. And so we care because body composition really directly relates to obesity, if that's where the body composition is lending itself, and then sort of what diseases might be associated with obesity. So when we think about modern medicine and when we think about sort of the present day, we know that for the most part, modern medicine has wiped out the threat from infectious diseases. And really this modern day world has made us sedentary. We sit in our desks all day. We are not up, we're not active. And I'm saying we sort of as Americans, we have become more sedentary throughout the last few decades. And that's due to, a lot of circumstances, but it has made us more sedentary, which then in turn has obviously caused us to not exercise as much. And then that has led to diseases. So what are some diseases that obesity leads to? And we're really going to talk about this throughout the course of this semester. And so some diseases that obesity leads to, we know that we can have heart disease. And then from this, we know that we can have high blood pressure. We can have high cholesterol. This can lead to diabetes. This can lead to some forms of cancer. So these are just a few examples, but ones that we'll talk about throughout this semester. And so it's important to understand that obesity can lead to certain diseases. And then as exercise physiologists, we try to use exercise to sort of heal and help the body so that we don't have these diseases. So what I'm going to show you now are self-reported obesity among US adults. And this is from the CDC, so the Center for Disease Control. And this map starts in 2011, and I'll show you about 7 years of this. So let me just orient you to this map really quickly. This is the United States. Here is Wyoming, and you can see Wyoming is this yellow color. So that means that less than 30% of the adults sort of self-report as less than 30% being obese. And so the self-report is using body mass index. And the way that we calculate body mass index is weight in pounds divided by height in inches squared, and then you take that number and multiply by 703. And so obviously these self-reported measurements, maybe some people are not truthful on their weight. Maybe they make themselves taller or shorter than they actually are. And so assessing BMI this way is not accurate, but it does get you some population norms pretty quickly, even though it's not as accurate as some of the other methods that we'll talk about. So you can see that in this orange section, so we have sort of the southern and the southeastern part of the United States, and even up into Michigan. Up to 35% of the US adults in these areas report obesity. And then 2012, we see similar trends. By 2013, we've had to add a new color. Mississippi and West Virginia are now reporting 10 years ago greater than 35% of their adults self-report as obese. and then Arkansas, and then these kind of flip back and forth between this 30 and 35%. Like Arkansas was dark back in 2014 and is not in 2015. But you can see that as time goes along, we do have more states that have adults that have a self-reported obese rate of greater than 35%. And so really, why I showed you this map is to just sort of set the stage that we are kind of in a healthcare crisis with individuals being sedentary and it really hurting body composition, which leads to obesity, which can lead to certain disease states. And so this is a body mass index. And what this chart is, it gives your height here on the left-hand side and then your weight in pounds up at the top. So I'll give you a second, maybe just find where you fall on this chart. If you're in the green, that means that you have a normal body mass index. If you're in the yellow, that means you are overweight. Orange, obese, and then extreme obese is a BMI over 40. Now, one of the reasons that BMI is not a great tool for a good portion of the population, and especially younger, active, healthy adults, typically we see football players, basketball players, wrestlers, they fall sometimes in these higher categories, and they're certainly not obese. They're not unhealthy. They are, exercising their heart out. They're doing a fantastic job eating right. But sometimes body composition, especially whenever you measure it with the height and the weight formula, isn't always accurate. And so it's really important to not be hard on yourself if you fall in one of these areas, but just to understand the limitations specifically to assessing body mass index this way. Excuse me. So let's talk about a few more accurate ways to assess body composition. And the first one, other than BMI, which is not super accurate, the first more accurate way is this impedance to electric flow. So you really want to make sure that you're hydrated for this measurement. And basically you have these voltage detectors that are placed on your hands and feet, and it tracks this impedance. So it's this way to assess body composition through electrode techniques. And it basically is this electrical potential across the conducting system. And so what it does is it's conducting through your body and it's able to give you your body composition. Now, outside of more of a clinical population, we've seen these become more popular, just sort of at-home methods. So these smart scales are very popular nowadays, and can give you your BMI and a better accurate reading of your body composition. These handheld devices are also very common as well. And so whenever you see this impedance to electrical flow, maybe think about if you've been at the gym and you've been on a treadmill or the elliptical or the bike and you hold on to those sensors and it gives you your heart rate. This is sort of the same idea of this impedance to electrical flow being able to give you your body composition measurement. Another way to measure body composition are circumference measurements. And so essentially what we're doing here is we are measuring the girth of your waist, your hips, the biggest part of your quad, your triceps, and then your forearms, as well as sort of like the meatier part of your lower leg and calf. And so essentially what you do is you take these measurements, you plug them into a formula. It's based off population norms, whether you're a male or a female, and you're able to get your body composition that way. And so this is a cheap and effective way, especially if you do something pre or post, if you're training for a certain event, or any of these really. It's great to do before you start an exercise program and then maybe post an exercise program or right before that big competition, just to see how you've improved. Skin fold is another way to assess body composition. And so with this, we use calipers. And so these calipers basically pinch your skin. And this kind of gives a better example here, where you really want to pinch the fat, not so much the skin. And you're able to distinguish the difference between kind of the fat, the muscle, the skin, and the bone. And there are different sites. So you have your triceps, the subscap, which is sort of the mid to low, not the lower part of your back, more the mid part of your back, your abdomen. And it does make a difference how you hold the caliper. And so if you're doing pre-post measurements on someone, you really want the same person that's administering the skin calipers to do the same test on you, because there is kind of some user error and everyone kind of has their own technique, even though it should be the same and standard. We as humans aren't perfect. And so it's best to have the same person do your pre and post measurements. So essentially you get these numbers from the skin caliper, it's plugged into a formula, and you're able to assess your body composition. Another way to assess your body composition is the BOD pod. I got my master's in clinical exercise physiology at UNC Charlotte, and we had a BOD pod. And so I got to be one of the people to validate it and make sure it was reliable when we got it. I won't tell you how many years ago, but I always love the BOD pod because it looks like a little spaceship, like something out of the future. But essentially, the BOD pod uses air displacement to assess your body composition. So this individual has kind of a swim hat, a shower hat on, because you don't want the air that goes through the hair to sort of make your measurements wrong. And he probably has on tighter bottoms as well. And so you basically take the measurements of the BOD pod before an individual gets in and after an individual gets in, and it's air displacement. And so you have to be very skilled technician. You have to make sure that the machine is calibrated, but this gives you a really accurate reading of your body composition. But again, this is expensive. So you couldn't take an entire, football team through this. You couldn't take 50 individuals. And I mean, you could, but it would just be expensive. So therefore, understanding sort of your population, what you're trying to do, what method is going to be the most accurate, but also kind of the least expensive, because a lot of times we're limited by cost as well. So the BOD pod is another way to assess. Hydrostatic weighing. Man, back in the day, this used to be the gold standard. It's not anymore. And we actually have one of these hydrostatic weighing containers, I guess, if you will, here in Corbett. And so what this individual will have to do is hold on to the side and exhale all of the air out of your lungs, which is really counterintuitive when you're submerging your head underwater. But you exhale all of the air out of your lungs, you hold on, and you submerge yourself all the way into the water. And again, this uses water displacement to calculate body fat percentages. And so I've done this. It's a little daunting. It's a little scary, but obviously you can come up for air if you need to, but that just means that it wasn't an accurate measurement and you have to do it again. So hydrostatic weighing used to be the gold standard. It's not anymore. So the gold standard now is the DEXA. So DEXA is the gold standard. This stands for dual energy X-ray absorptiometry. And we have one of these in Corbett. These are very popular in the clinical setting. You can assess bone mineral density. You can assess body fat. It really is the gold standard, and the technology that comes from this has really improved over the last few years. So that's why this is the gold standard. So this is what a DEXA looks like. You have a patient lay kind of on this bed, this mat, and this arm of the DEXA goes back and forth over the individual. And what the DEXA is able to do through using X-rays is to distinguish between bone, muscle, and fat. And that's really important when we're talking about body composition and what that means for body fat percentage. And so I have an example here. I'm going to blow this up a little bit. So the three different tissue types are shown in different colors here. So we have blue is going to be the bone, orange is going to be the fat, and then the pinkish red will be muscle. And so what this does is the DEXA uses population norms. This individual fell in the normal BMI range. And so it gives you these median reference values from 20 to 85 years of age, and it's able to show you sort of where you fall and what your total body fat percentage is. I also want to scroll down and show you these summary results from the DEXA. So the DEXA is really cool in that it can break down your left arm, your right arm, your trunk, your left leg. So say you had an injury maybe to your left leg and you've really been focusing on strength training exercises, you can do a pre and post DEXA after rehabbing your left leg. And you can see how you've improved through fat mass, lean mass, bone mineral content. That's what BMC stands for, bone mineral content. And then the overall percent fat is given as well. And so the DEXA is really cool in that it can kind of hone in on one specific part of the body. And that's cool for rehabilitation purposes as well. So moving along to kind of the final idea of this body composition lecture, and that is fat patterning. So what is fat patterning? It is the distribution of where your fat is stored. And clinically, this is a really big deal because I'm going to skip down to this android and gynoid. I'll go up to the slide I just skipped in 1 second. But for the android shape, this more apple shape, basically it's saying that you have more fat above your waist. And if you have more fat above your waist, you have more fat closer to your heart. And so this can really lead to increases in heart disease and heart attacks. And so if you have more fat above your waist, this clinically can be pretty significant. Now, if you have more fat in your hips and your buttocks region, this doesn't tend to lead itself to higher incidences of heart disease, though it's still important to make sure that your body composition is in check, if you will, so that you don't develop diabetes and cancer and other diseases that we've spoken about. But how we determine the android and the gynoid fat patterning is through this waist to hip ratio. So you measure the smallest part in your stomach region, your waist, and the largest part, your hips. And if you're a male and your waist to hip ratio, you really want to stay below 0.95 or around 0.95. For females, you really want to stay around or below 0.8, because if you go above 1, this is when it's bad, right? This is when we can see heart disease. Whenever you have sort of your waist and your hips being the same circumference, that's when we tend to see more clinically significant individuals that do have heart disease and other diseases associated with obesity. Whereas the pear shape, we do not see that as much. And so the conclusions and the take-home messages of this lecture are that there are several ways to assess body composition. There are the gold standard is DEXA. So there's several ways to assess body composition and fat percentage. BMI being the least accurate, and then the DEXA being the gold standard. And we also talked about fat patterning and how clinically this can lend itself to diseases like heart disease. And so as exercise physiologists, it's really important for that first step when you're working with a new client or new patient to understand their body composition and their goals and ways that you can help them. So that concludes this lecture on body composition. See you for the next one.